Hello, hello, and welcome to my thought on this gloomy Monday. And I've been reading, of course, my paper's a week late, and I'm reading about the outrage of the endemic uh, racism, which is not the one where we just say, oh, I hate blacks or I hate Jews or whatever, but actually the way people are ignored because of their race or because of their age or because of their status, just ignored so that they don't even have a chance. And in not so much my generation, but my parents' generation, what immigrants did that came to America was want to melt in. That was the most important thing. They used to say America was the melting pot. And they denied their ethnicity by, among many things, changing their names. Uh, my father's name was Isidore Rudolph. And, well, let's start with the beginning. When my grandfather came to Ellis Island, which is the entry point, his name was Bialystotsky. And of course, the joke is that the man in Ellis Island that was checking him in said, "What's your name?" He said, "My name is Joe Balistotsky." And the man said, "How do you spell it?" And he walked out with the name Miller. And that was our name, Miller. But my father's name was, and so you could not tell by the name that this was an Orthodox Jew, not Hasidic, but an Orthodox Jew. He was an Orthodox Jewish butcher. Um, my father, his name was Isidore, and he changed his name to his initials because he said, now this is in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in America, he said that it would harm his business. He was an accountant, and he did estate planning. It would harm his business if he was blatantly Jewish, and his name would label him as Jewish. My uncle, his older brother, whose name was Samuel David, changed his name to SD. And we always called him, my father was always IR, and my uncle SD was always SD. I didn't know that his name was Sam. We had a shoemaker, and this was a shoemaker who was Italian. And he changed his name. His name was Massini, Bill Massini. But he changed his name to Bill Mason. And I used to go into his shop, and he used to love Italian opera. And I would hear him singing along with Puccini and Verdi and Massenet and Strauss. Gorgeous, gorgeous voice. And it must have been 10 years. It was always Bill Mason, and it was Bill Mason's shoe shop. But when, it must have been, it had to be 20 years, that he got a part in the Toledo Opera. He sang Rodolfo in Madame Butterfly, in La Boheme. And he was a hit. And he became one of the major members of the Toledo Opera Society, or whatever it is. And when he did, he changed the name of his shop to Bill Massini. And I also remember my mother being terribly afraid that people would judge us because we were Jewish. And one of the things that she would never do is do her laundry on Sunday because she said that would offend the neighbors. And whenever I failed, which if anybody's been following this thing was continually, my mother always attributed it to my being Jewish. Even though my name was Lynn Ruth Miller, and though I might look Jewish, I could also be Italian, I could also be other things. But my mother always said, I used to say, no, that's not true. That's not true. If someone doesn't want to hire me or doesn't want to marry me, it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm Jewish. It has to do with who I am and what I am and what my skills are. So that the stereotyping, and I know that I learned this. I learned how much how shallow people are in their judgments. When I finally got a job, I had been sick for many years, and I finally got a job, and I did not realize that it was at the newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin, to break a strike. But I didn't realize that. My degree was in journalism, and I didn't realize that this was this was the reason that I was offered this job sight unseen. And I remember I answered the ad, and the man called me and he said, "Oh, we want you to start right away." He said, "When can you come for an interview?" I was so excited. And I had said to my parents, who insisted that the reason I couldn't get a job as a journalist was because I was Jewish and because I was old. And I said, "No, that isn't so. That isn't so. You're wrong. People, this is modern times, and this was the 60s. This is modern times, and people don't think that way." And the PR guy flew me out to Madison, Wisconsin. And I want to tell you that when I left, I was living in a mobile home at that time, and when I left the mobile home, uh, it was the most beautiful day of my life. I had been trying for 6 years to get a job, and here I had the perfect job. It was writing features for the newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin. Was so excited, and I took special care with what I wore, and of course I had been sick for some time, so my clothes were not very fashionable, and they certainly didn't fit me well because I was emaciated. But I tried my best, and all the way on the flight, I couldn't stop talking. Of course, I can't stop talking anyway. I couldn't stop talking about how excited I was to be able to write feature articles for this wonderful progressive newspaper in Madison, Wisconsin, which was a college town. The University of Wisconsin was there. And life was going to be so beautiful for me. And I had worked very hard, and now I was getting my reward. When I went there, the PR guy picked me up, and the idea was that I was going to stay for 2 days because I was going to meet the staff the next day. And the first day I was going to meet the manager, the head editor, the editor. And the PR man put me in a room. It was a beautiful plush room with wooden paneling. And I had been living in a mobile home that was in a deprived area of town and had been struggling for enough money to feed myself. So to be in this luxurious atmosphere and to be able to have a job that I was almost assured, according to the PR man, I was hired. They just needed to do this interview, and it was a formality. And this was going to be my life, and this is what I went to school for. And it didn't make any difference that I was Jewish, and it didn't make any difference that I was in my mid-30s, and it didn't make any difference that I was a woman. I had talent, and I was going to be able to use it. And then the editor came in. And when he came in, he was a chain smoker, and at that time people smoked. And he was a chain smoker. He walked in, and he didn't even look at me. He just began pacing back and forth and saying how difficult it was to hire people, and that people no longer wanted to do the job. They just wanted a posh place where they could get a high salary and sit around and do nothing. And then he looked at his watch and he said, "Oh my God," he said, "I've got a deadline in 10 minutes," and left. I had not said a word. I had not said a word. And then the PR man came and he said, "Well," he said, "I'm going to make your reservation and we're going to send you home." So I said, "Well, aren't I staying overnight? Aren't I meeting the staff?" And he said, "No, Mr. Smith," whatever his name was, doesn't think that you will fit in here." And he made a reservation, and it didn't hit me that the man I hadn't said anything. I hadn't said anything at all. But while I was waiting for the plane, I walked in to use the restroom, and I looked in the mirror, and of course what I saw was, believe me, a lot better than what I see now. But I saw a woman who was old. I wasn't old, but I was approaching 40. I was not the perky, beautiful little thing I was in my 20s. I was, because I was recovering from an illness, I was very plain. I was very plainly dressed. I was nothing that would turn heads. And it was then that I realized what had happened, that the man had rejected me because of how I looked. Now, I don't know whether I looked Jewish, but I know I looked like I was a plain, ordinary woman. And I was very quiet on the trip home because I didn't want to offend the neighbors by my offensive appearance. And when I came home, I had left my car at the airport, and when I drove home, I walked into my house, and I was surrounded by my pets. And if you remember, I had 2 dogs and 2 cats that loved me as much as I loved them. And the familiar smells of home and the life that I had built in my mobile home surrounded me. And I stopped crying for my rejection I stopped crying because I had been rejected for something so it said no more about me than the skin of an orange tells you how sweet it is. I stopped crying, and I remembered that man, that tense, unhappy man who made all his judgments, his surface judgments on appearance and on stereotypical decisions instead of what really mattered. And I cried again, but this time I cried for him. And now I am crying for all the people in the world who don't realize that there's so much more to a person than their appearance. There's so much more to a person than the color of his skin or the belief that guides him and his moral belief or his age. That's my thought for today. Thank you so much for joining me.